I'm George Nicholas. I'm a professor of archaeology here at Simon Fraser University and also the director of the IPinCH Project. And this is an extension of the work that I've been doing over the last 20 plus years, dealing with the value of archaeology and heritage issues relating to indigenous peoples. I mean, it's a very interesting history, and there's two aspects of it. The first is that about 20 or so years ago, I became involved with working directly with First Nations. And that came about by when I moved to British Columbia. I ended up in Kamloops, and there was an opportunity to teach several courses at Simon Fraser University's then newly established campus on the Kamloops Indian Reserve. And so I started teaching several courses, which led to full-time employment there, and I ended up being there for 16 years, teaching archaeology to First Nations, who comprise the majority of my students. And this gave me the opportunity to work directly with communities to both teach them about archaeology and share with them the value that archaeology has in helping them to capture and protect their own heritage. But at the same time, I learned a huge amount. I learned as much from them as they from me. And in the process, I became more and more involved with what would become known as indigenous archaeology, which simply put is archaeology with, for, and by indigenous peoples. And over the course of those years, I was really involved with trying to make archaeology a more open discipline. In other words, by focusing on the process of archaeology and ensuring that indigenous peoples had a more meaningful role within it and were able to start to not only have the tools of archaeology to use however they see fit, but to make other archaeologists aware that here's an opportunity to expand the breadth of the discipline. So here the focus was on the process of archaeology. Now, a change in direction came in the early 2000s. I was working with and having conversations with my colleague Kelly Bannister, who was working on her PhD dissertation with the Skeechusin First Nation about some of their traditional plants and doing the phytochemistry of them to see why they were effective as both a food source and had other very important qualities. And Kelly alerted me to the fact that many indigenous peoples were having concerns over their traditional knowledge, over the intellectual property they had relating to the use of plants. What is better known as biopiracy, as one area of concern, where these large pharmaceutical companies would, go into Amazonian communities and trying to, obtain by whatever means, information about the use of particular plants that the pharmaceutical companies could then develop into, medical products to great profit. Which is all well and fine as long as the communities, do receive, just benefits and all of that. So Kelly alerted me to this, and she had been asked to contribute a chapter to a volume on intellectual indigenous property rights. And as she was, working on her own chapter for that volume, she said to the editor, gee, there's a real need for something relating to archaeology and that aspect of heritage. So Kelly and I decided to write a chapter together on that. That led to another writing product that an article we published in Current Anthropology that was entitled "Copywriting the Past." And this was modeled off of a earlier chapter in that journal that Michael Brown published entitled "Who Owns Native Culture?" And in the course of all of this, working with Kelly and writing these articles and so on, we came up with a much deeper and broader understanding of the kinds of issues related to cultural heritage. So we were publishing on this. And in the meantime, our colleague Julie Hallowell had read the piece that we wrote in current anthropology, and that prompted her to consider developing and to seek money for developing a conference on that topic. Soon after that, I was talking to Julie, and she informed me of this. And then, I can't remember the particulars, but somehow Julie and Kelly and I decided that, gee, we should give some serious thought to this topic and to be proactive, because we saw that what had been unfolding in the realm of ethnobotany, the concerns arising about biopiracy and so on, were really, really important and affecting and influencing how researchers would go about their business, how they needed to go about their business. And we saw that if we did not start to become proactive about this in the realm of cultural heritage, we might find ourselves suddenly imposed with, legislation from outside, like NAGPRA, that could affect how researchers went about their business. So this was an opportunity to be proactive, to look at the kinds of issues that were rising, the effect that these issues were having on Indigenous people, certainly, but on the research process. This then led to, Julie and I starting to draft a research proposal for major funding to the National Endowment for the Humanities in the United States, which we were not successful for. We then shifted our thinking slightly. We brought Kelly in on this, and we developed the first of 4 applications or 4 proposals to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for their MCRI funding. And on the 4th proposal, we were successful, and that provided us with the funds that we would go ahead and launch IPinCH with. Well, the IPinCH project is an opportunity to look at issues relating to heritage, who benefits from it, who controls the process, in a way that really hasn't been done before at this scale. We have the opportunity to work with some of the most socially committed people in the world, that is scholars who've been working with Indigenous peoples for many, many years. And these are also some individuals that are essentially a dream team, as it were, for this kind of project that deals with the interface of research with Indigenous peoples, whether it be archaeology, anthropology, museum studies, and so on. And we also have the opportunity here to work with partnering organizations, many of whom are First Nations or Indigenous organizations from throughout North America, including Canada, the United States, and then further afield, Australia, Kyrgyzstan, Japan, New Zealand, and so on. And together, we have the opportunity to look at intellectual property issues in ways that go beyond simply individual studies of what a researcher or what a research team can do with a particular organization. We are certainly doing that, in which case we're paralleling the work of colleagues in other realms. But because of the size of our research team and the many different disciplines represented in archaeology and anthropology, museum studies and ethics and so on, that we can look at this, look at these issues from a variety of different perspectives, including lawyers and legal scholars being a critical part of our team, and helping us to understand what are the protections available to or not available to Indigenous peoples relating to their heritage. So what really sets us off more than anything else really is the scale of this and our ability to sustain this kind of research, given the expertise, given the long-term relations that many of our team already have with these communities. So it's just a remarkable opportunity. Well, ownership is an absolutely loaded term. And certainly in Western society, we look at whether it's heritage, whether it's property, as something belonging to someone. And we tend to look at that in terms of an individual's rights. When we're looking at non-Western societies, we are also looking at communal rights and communal forms of ownership. But there are strong arguments why the word itself, ownership, is not appropriate. It's simply a familiar term that we tend to use very broadly. And this often comes out in the term who owns the past, which in a sense captures some of these issues, but on the other hand, it forces us into a familiar rut of thinking about things in a very specific way. And when we're talking about heritage, especially indigenous heritage, we're looking both at individual versus group or communal rights. We're looking at legal realms, legal regimes that can be substantially different from those in the West. And at the same time, there are some remarkable parallels. So in other words, in Western society, we talk about authors having copyright to their work. That is, the individual creator should be the primary beneficiary of that work. And yet they also want to share that work with a much broader audience. And in indigenous societies, we have a kind of ownership, or rather kind of copyright, in the sense that families or clans may own certain symbols, and they may be willing to share those on a very limited basis, or they can even give others the rights to use or sing those songs within a very restricted set of parameters. And that is very much like copyright. So on the one hand, ownership, quote unquote, in indigenous societies, it can be very different from that in Western society. And at the same time, there are some important parallels to acknowledge. Community is a huge part of IPinCH. IPinCH is a university-based research project that has some grand theoretical goals. That is, we want to understand how and why intellectual property issues emerge, when and where they do, to use that knowledge to better the research process, to make it more equitable, and of course to use our knowledge to then inform policymakers and professional organizations so that we can all in the end benefit and do a better job of sharing the knowledge that we have and making essentially the world a better place as a result. One key component of this, of course, is that if we want to understand how intellectual property issues emerge for indigenous peoples, you have to start with the communities. As scholars, we could theorize until the cows come home and come up with, with certain kinds of explanations which may or may not be correct. But we really need to go directly to the community. We have to work from the ground level up to understand what these issues are, in part because, as we've already mentioned, intellectual property means different things to different people. And what one First Nation or what indigenous group identifies as their intellectual property or their intangible heritage may be different from another group. And we quickly learn with this kind of research that there's no cookbook recipe, that each society has had a different history, they have different worldviews, different values. So we really need to work with the communities. Now, in our case, as we started to bring together those scholars, those practitioners that we saw being an essential part to comprising the IPinCH team, many of them already had a very long history of working with particular communities. So Claire Smith from Australia had been working with the Barunga community, T.J. Ferguson with the Hopi, Natasha Lyons with the Inuvialuit, and so on. And they were aware that those particular communities had particular kinds of challenges, particular kinds of needs. And here is an opportunity for these communities to partner with us and to come in to the IPinCH project at the ground level, so that we could collectively develop IPinCH, that we could ensure that the kinds of needs, the kinds of knowledge that they had could be woven into the structure of IPinCH from the very beginning. IPinCH had to be based with communities, and this led to the creation of our community-based initiatives, of which we now have 15 of various forms. And what's important about these initiatives is that the goal of the initiative, the kinds of issues being targeted, are identified by the communities. The community, working with some of our research team, develops the proposal, develops the research design that identifies how this project is going to go forward. IPinCH supplies the funds to make this happen, as well as some input on how to improve where it needs some improvement or strengthening the research design. The project takes place. We facilitate more than anything else. When the project is completed, the community has complete control over the research data. That is, they will review all of the information compiled and release generally much of it or most of it to the research team for its scholarly analysis, but some information, including the raw data from interviews conducted as part of that project, may be restricted, and it's retained by the community, and that's fine with us because it's their heritage, and we want to ensure that they don't give us anything they don't want us to have. They also have the opportunity to pull out of that whole process at any time. So from the very start, they have complete control. And in fact, the way I always look at this is, as my colleague and team, IPinCH team member Sheila Greer puts it, the community is in the driver's seat of the research process. And this is one of the unique things about IPinCH that really lets it stand out from many other large-scale research projects like this. Yes, there are many challenges. An important starting point is to ask, well, who is the community? In some cases, the community constitutes, the First Nation, and it's representative of the broad values, the broad goals, and worldview of a large group of people. In other cases, the community may be a smaller group, perhaps representing shared views from different communities, and the community itself is not a political entity unto itself. So, that's one key issue in terms of who's the community, who does it represent, and there's no, one answer to that. In each of our community-based initiatives with IPinCH, we're looking at different kinds of communities. Secondly, there's the issue of, well, whose voice is being represented by the community. And in some cases, it's the Heritage Office that is our liaison with the community. In other cases, it's individuals within that community who are representing the larger group. So, those are some of the issues. The other kind of challenge we face is when we're doing academic research with communities, we're necessarily working within the academic infrastructure. And this has been one of our greatest challenges. That is, how do we get research funds to community members to conduct the kind of research that has been part of our larger research design, in which our funder, the Social Sciences for Humanities Research Council, has approved. Universities are often in the middle. They're there to protect the funder's interests as well as the researcher's interests. So they may be very conservative in how they release funds. And this has been, quite a challenge, because universities are used to sending funds to other universities, and they have memoranda of agreement set up. Universities are less familiar with sending funds to, say, the Penobscot tribe or to the Saginaw Chippewa tribe. And this has then required us to come up with such things as agreement for services or independent contractors agreements, where we get our research funds to the individuals at the community level. But sometimes this has taken us months and months to work out the means to do this, which can be very frustrating, especially for the communities. I mean, in each of our community-based initiatives, we're dealing with relatively small amounts of money, $20,000 or so. And some of these organizations routinely deal with government grants of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's a little bit ironic, it's a little bit problematic that universities and other such organizations have such restricted means of transferring funds to organizations that are that are very familiar with and very comfortable with and competent in dealing with such funding transfers. IPinCH is not about restricting knowledge. It's not about curtailing access to intellectual property. It's about making things work better. And I think that is really our goal. Where we can work with communities, we can work with organizations to ensure that there is better and more equitable exchange of knowledge, and at the same time to help people recognize that heritage is not public domain, and that much of it can be shared willingly by the communities, as long as it's done respectfully, and that as long as there's acknowledgement that some of that information, some of that heritage, it's simply inappropriate to share or to use in particular venues, such as for commercial uses. We are developing a tradition, I hope, of greater engagement with communities in whatever discipline we're working with, and these individuals taking and promoting the IPinCH philosophy, if we want to call it that. For me, this has just been a dream of being involved with this kind of research with such a fantastic research team. Members on the team, some of whom I've been reading their work when I was a graduate student. And here they are, we're all working together on this fantastic project. So it's been immensely gratifying, and yet there's such a need for this kind of research. And IPinCH isn't the only thing out there, and there are a lot of other projects that are working on similar kinds of issues. And I think that collectively, Western scholarship is going to benefit immensely. And the world continues to change, and I think indigenous peoples are increasingly recognized. The IPinCH philosophy is, in a sense, looking to develop fair and equitable partnerships in the research process. One that recognizes, one that foregrounds the heritage holders. We talk about descendant communities, and in IPinCH we have been highlighting indigenous peoples as being the knowledge holders who have been at most risk and with the least protection for their heritage. But more broadly, all of us, from wherever we are from, we have our heritage out there. We have our archaeological sites. We have our heritage places. And so what we're trying to do with IPinCH, it has relevance for everyone, that we want to ensure that everyone's heritage is respected, and is not used in ways that are harmful or unwelcome by by the source community.
Ah, yeah, hey, 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 yeah.